Okay, guys, welcome to Social Studies today. Today we're going to focus on United States foreign policy post 9/11. So our foreign policy is policy in the United States that deals with foreign countries, so throughout the world. And just for point of reference, you have domestic. Domestic policy would strictly be about policies about things in the United States, and foreign has to do with other countries. So those would be kind of two different. So if you see something about domestic policy, it's just about policies in the United States, and foreign policy is how we deal with other countries. Okay, so this is talking about foreign policy after 9/11 happened. Okay, so I'm going to read this column over here. It says the United States foreign policy changed in some very noticeable ways after September 11, 2011. In other ways, foreign policy after 9/11 has remained much the same when George W. Bush assumed the presidency in January 2001. His first major foreign policy initiative was the creation of a missile shield over parts of Europe. In the theory, the shield would give added protection if North Korea or Iran ever launched a missile strike. In fact, Condoleezza Rice, the head of the Bush National Security Council, was slated to give a policy speech about missile shield on September 11, 2001. So the question says, based on the first two sentences of this article, what two things do you think this article will address? So the first sentence, the United States foreign policy changed in some ways, noticeably ways after September 11, 2001. In other ways, foreign policy after 9/11 has remained much the same. So those are the first two sentences. So it's going to be on foreign policy has changed, but foreign policy has stayed the same. Okay, so that's what you put for 1 and 2. Let's go down to this next box. Okay. 9 days later, on September 20th in 2001, in a speech before a joint session of Congress, Bush changed the direction of American foreign policy. He made terrorism his focus. We'll direct every resource at our command, every means of diplomacy, every tool of intelligence, every instrument of law enforcement, every financial influence, and every necessary weapon of war to destruction and defeat the global terror network, Bush said. The speech is perhaps best remembered for his remark, "We'll pursue nations that provide aid or safe haven to terrorism," said Bush. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you're with us or you are against terrorists. So it says two questions. What shift in American foreign policy took place after 9/11? And then it asks you to speculate. What do you think other nations thought when they heard President Bush's comment? Okay. So what shift took place? He made terrorism kind of its number one priority. And the next question is, how do you think other countries reacted when he said either you're with us or you're with the terrorists? Okay, so how do you think other countries viewed that? And that's really your opinion. It's not right or wrong. Okay, let's read this next one. The most noticeable change in U.S. foreign policy is its focus on preventative action, not just preemptive action. So preventive, you prevent it before it happens, and preemptive, basically that would be after it kind of happens. This is also known as the Bush Doctrine. Nations often use preemptive strikes in wartime when they know that an enemy action is imminent. Okay, so let me go back and restate that. So prevent is you're going to prevent something. In preemptive, you know something's going to happen, so you strike first. So when the U.S. invaded Iraq in March 2003, however, it broadened its policy to include preventive warfare. So we're trying to prevent war. That's what preventive means. The Bush administration told the public erroneously that Saddam Hussein's regime had nuclear materials and would soon be able to provide atomic weapons. Bush vaguely tied Hussein to al-Qaeda, again erroneously, and said the invasion was in part to prevent Iraq from supplying terrorists with nuclear weapons. Thus, the Iraq invasion was to prevent some perceived but not clearly evident event. So it just asks what's the difference between preventative and preemptive. So prevent, you try to prevent, and preemptive, you think something's going to happen, so you do something about it. Okay, so like basically, if there's a bully in school, to prevent him from bullying you, maybe you avoid him, you take a different route. And preemptive is, even if you think he's a bully, but you're not sure, you punch him first. That would be preemptive, okay? Then according to the article, what was the Bush administration reason for invading Iraq? And that is basically, they thought they had nuclear weapons. Okay, so let's go to this next box right here. It says U.S. humanitarian assistance has become more subject to foreign policy demands, in some cases become militarized. Independent non-government organizations, NGOs working with USAID, a branch of the State Department, have typically delivered worldwide humanitarian aid independently of American foreign policy. However, as Elizabeth Ferris reported in a recent Brookings Institution article, U.S. military commands have begun their own humanitarian assistance programs in areas where they are conducting military operations. Therefore, Army commanders can leverage humanitarian assistance to gain military advantages. That says NGOs, non-government organizations, also increasingly fall under closer federal scrutiny to ensure they comply with U.S. anti-terrorism policy. This requirement, said Ferris, made it difficult, indeed impossible, for U.S. humanitarian NGOs to claim they were independent of their government's policy. That, in turn, makes it more difficult for humanitarian mission to reach sensitive and dangerous locations. Okay. So an example of that would be, obviously, if there was like in Iraq, if there was like widespread hunger, we would normally give aid, or if there was like some sort of medical crisis, we would give aid no matter what their military policy, but that has changed a little bit. So probably we wouldn't necessarily be giving humanitarian aid to Iraq because we thought they were terrorists. That's really kind of the difference with that. So if we have like a perceived enemy, even though there might be humanitarian crisis going on, we probably wouldn't give that country aid after 9/11. Okay. And that's basically how U.S. Humanitarian assistance has changed since 9/11. Okay. Some things, however, have not changed. Even after 9/11, the U.S. continues its tendency to forge questionable alliances. It says the U.S. had to secure Pakistan support before invading neighboring Afghanistan to fight the Taliban, which intelligence says was an al-Qaeda supporter. The resulting alliance with Pakistan's President Pervez Musharraf was awkward. Musharraf's ties with Taliban al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden were questionable, and his commitment to the war on terror seemed half-hearted. Indeed, in early 2011, intelligence revealed that bin Laden was hiding in a compound in Pakistan and apparently had been for more than 5 years. America's special ops troops killed bin Laden in May, but his mere presence in Pakistan cast more doubt on that country's commitment to the war. Some member of Congress soon began calling for an end to Pakistani foreign aid. The U.S. has also found an uneasy ally in Hamid Karzai, president of post-invasion Afghanistan. Karzai is known to be corrupt, but he tolerates American presence in Afghanistan. So those situations are reminiscent of American alliances during the Cold War. The United States supported such unpopular leaders as the Shah of Iran and Nguyen Dinh Diem in South Vietnam simply because they're anti-communists. Okay, so what that says, sometimes our alliances were with countries that are, they do bad things and have bad people. You saw in Pakistan, Osama bin Laden was hiding out there, and Pakistan knew about it, but we're still giving him aid. And then it talks about in the Cold War, just because Iran and South Vietnam were against communism, we supported them. So sometimes, we partner up or alliance with people, and their leaders and their countries are doing questionable things. So that's really what that was about. Okay. This says George Bush warned Americans in 2001 that the war on terror would be long and as a result might be hard to recognize. Regardless, Bush failed to remember that the lessons of the Vietnam War and understand Americans are result driven. Americans were encouraged to see the Taliban virtually driven from power in 2002. It can understand a brief period of occupation and state building in Afghanistan. When the invasion of Iraq pulled resources away from Afghanistan, allowing the Taliban to become resurgent, and the Iraqi war itself became one of seemingly unending occupation, Americans became war weary. When voters briefly gave control of Congress to Democrats in 2006, they were in fact rejecting Bush's foreign policy. The public war weariness affects the Obama administration as the current president wrestles with withdrawing troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as allocating funds for other military ventures, such as Americans' limited involvement in the Libyan civil war. Okay. So this just asks, what would be an appropriate title for this section of the article? Lessons of Vietnam, Taliban driven out, war weariness, or Obama administration's affected. It's basically most Americans don't like us being in wars, just because the amount of people that are killed, the amount of money it costs. So really, we try to stay out of wars as much as possible. It's almost like last ditch. And you can see this Middle Eastern war, we still have troops in the Middle East. It's almost 20 years after, we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. So a lot of Americans don't like that because wars are really, they're costly. And there's also the cost of human life. Soldiers are dying every day. Okay. Okay, so these are graphs which obviously we certainly need to work on. And so this one says views of US global power fall to 40-year low. Okay. So the darker one says 53% in 2013 think we were less important and powerful than 10 years ago, and 17% think we're more important and powerful than we were 10 years ago. And this is like a public poll. So that's kind of how the Americans view it. So you're going to answer those two questions. The next one, this basically says majority says U.S. should mind its own business internationally. So you can see in 1964, only 20% said we should mind our own business. It went to 43 in 76, 41 in 95, 30 in 2002. Then it hit the high water mark. So over half of America thought we should mind our own business. That's just going to ask you about basically the different years on this graph. So you have 64, 76, 55, 30, and 2013. Okay. Now this is about the economy. So if you look at this is a pie graph, and this says 66% think it's a good thing to be involved in the global economy because it exposes U.S. to new markets and opportunities to grow. 25% think it's a bad thing because it exposes U.S. to greater economic risk and uncertainty. 8% don't know. I'm just going to ask you to interpret that graph. Okay. And this one talks about many of the public's top foreign policy goals reflect domestic concerns. So this just talks about protecting jobs of American workers, weapons of mass destruction, combating international drug trafficking. So you have the general public And then you have CFR members, and the CFR here would be, let me see what CFR stands for. CFR might be members of Congress, I think. So the general public is on the left. I think both these questions ask about the general public, okay? And this one just asks you to identify basically some of what these are right here. And then just, why are Americans less supportive of the U.S. taking an active role in global affairs? And the biggest reason, kind of war fatigue, costs money, we've been ineffective, U.S. lacks political leadership, people understand the importance of taking an active role, and we're more concerned about domestic policy. So those are kind of the 5 reasons why we really don't want to, why we have war fatigue. Okay. And this one just asks you to interpret the graphs. So it says, according to the information presented in the graphs, what is the general public's value? How do Americans or the general public feel about the United States' current foreign policy? And you can use any of the statistics in any of these graphs to kind of support your answer. And a lot of the reasons are going to be listed kind of in these last 2 about the money, war fatigue, and up here it talks about what we think are kind of important foreign policy versus domestic. So sometimes we think we'd rather be worrying about basically things happening in the United States as opposed to getting in wars around the world, okay? And the last one, what are some values of Americans' current foreign policy? So what are we currently focusing on today? Well, not today, but from these graphs right here. And this is all from 9/11, so this is a little bit old. So any of these questions, you can all just take some of the answers from the graphs right here. And this bonus one you don't have to do. And these, you don't want to write them, that's fine. Just think about kind of the reasons why people don't like our foreign policy, or some people like it. Okay, that's it for today. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you need to go back and reread that, you certainly can. All right, you guys, have a wonderful day. Bye.